Good afternoon. You just get everybody to take their seats and then we can get started. Firstly, thank you very much for coming out to the Frome hustings. We have all but one of the candidates here with us today. Firstly, as you can imagine, I'm going to ask you to give all candidates time to answer questions clearly and concisely. We do have to give equal opportunity to everybody on the stage. I'm Lisa Merriweather Millard. I'm your host and leader of Frome Town Council. We'll start with 1 minute of introductions from all of the candidates, and then we will move into 7 pre-selected questions. If we can ask the candidates to stick to 2 minutes each per answer, please. And hopefully we should have time for the floor to ask some questions following the pre-selected questions. My colleagues Rachel and Laura are with me today. They will be moving around and taking questions from those pre-selected questions, as well as additional questions if time allows. My colleague Peter is up at the front. He will be keeping time. For those of you on the panel, amber means that you have 30 seconds left, and red means that you are completely out of time. Okay, I'm going to ask you again to please stick to your 2 minutes. It means that we can have more questions from the floor. Okay, any questions before we begin? Okay, best of luck. Okay, starting with your 1 minute, about who you are and your plans for Frome. Can we please start with Lorna?
All right. Hello, my name is Lorna Cork and I'm standing for the Christian People's Alliance. And our main push is really for moral education in schools. Children have just come out of lockdown and then they're now in the schools and they're being confronted with all sorts of different ideologies. And Christianity is often not taught in the RSE. So that is our main push. And I thank you for listening and I hope I'll get some support on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lorna. Can we move to Peter, please?
Good afternoon, Frome. My name is Peter Richardson. I am the United Kingdom Independence Party candidate for the forthcoming Somerton and Frome by-election. I'm a military veteran of 40 years, serving in the Army and the Royal Air Force as a helicopter pilot and flight instructor. And after that, became a commercial pilot, working mainly in Africa and Middle East, flying helicopter emergency medical services. I come from Somerton, where I'm a town councillor, and I know Frome well. I used to be a magistrate here in Frome. Should I be elected as your MP, my main aim is to listen to your concerns, especially those on affordable and social housing. I'm against the pack saddle development on greenfield sites, and I would also like to reduce corporate tax for sole traders and small businessmen to enable them to reinvest and grow their business. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Rosie?
Hi, I'm Rosie. I am a train conductor, which I've been for the last 5 years. Before that, I worked for 6 years in the care industry. I'm standing as your only independent candidate in this by-election. If you elect me, my priority issues for constituency would be to address the cost of living crisis primarily by focusing on reinvestment in our public services, our NHS, transport, and social housing are all in crisis. So I'd be advocating for and working towards the renationalisation, reform and reinvestment of our essential services. Thank you.
Thank you. Martin?
Hello, my name is Martin Dimmery and I'm the Green Party candidate. I've been on this stage many times in the past, but I never quite imagined I'd be addressing an audience here to ask for your vote to become Member of Parliament for the Somerton and Frome constituency. I moved on from working here in 2017 when I became amongst the first 2 Greens ever elected to Somerset County Council. Last year, I was in as one of the 4 Green candidates, successfully winning 4 of the 6 seats in the new Somerset Council. I entered politics at a point when everything I believed in was being undermined and trashed by conservatism. The NHS, education, culture, housing, as well as the catastrophic calamity of Brexit. Worse still, their callous disregard towards the very survival of this planet and the failure to recognise climate change. This country needs a radical change, and this by-election represents a unique chance to propel the Green movement forward and elect our second MP.
Thank you, Martin. Faye. Okay.
Sorry. Hi, my name is Faye Purbrick. I'm the Conservative candidate for this by-election. I grew up in Somerset and I've been serving as a county councillor for the last 6 years across the whole area, including the education portfolio, which brought me first my involvement at Berkeley School in Frome. I'm the only candidate on this panel who's going to be able to hit the ground running as your MP. If you elect me, I've got the ear of government. I'm already taking steps to make sure we're building on the investment that we need in this area. My priorities from talking to all of you are around cutting crime and getting more representation here from the 558 extra police officers that we've secured for Avon and Somerset. Also investing in education and skills, making sure we're creating the workforce of the future so we can attract business here, so we can all have good jobs that pays for everything else. And also continuing that investment in the NHS, making sure we're dealing with prevention so people can live healthier for longer, but also investing in those surgical services that we need to treat those who've got conditions that need action. Thank you.
Thank you. Neil.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Neil Guild. I'm the Labour Party candidate for Somerton and Frome. So I was born and raised in Somerset. I'm raising my own family within the county. I've previously served as an army officer, including 2 operational tours in Iraq. I currently work as a civil engineer in the county, working in the highways and transport sector. I've got 2 questions for you. First one is, after 13 years of a Tory government, do you feel better off? I'll leave you to answer that one yourselves. And secondly, which political party do you trust to form the next government? I'm going to make the case on that one, at least, that the answer is the Labour Party. Only the Labour Party can address the issues the country is facing, save the NHS and make sure it lasts for another 75 years, make sure that people have the public services they need, make sure we address the environment, address the climate emergency that we're facing, and make sure people have the growth and standards of living in this country that they need. And only Labour can build a better Britain.
Thank you. Sarah.
Good afternoon. My name's Sarah Dyke. I'm the Liberal Democrat candidate, and it's great to see so many of you here this afternoon. I love living here, and I split my time between my home near Wincanton and Frome, where my partner lives. I was first elected in 2015, and I'm now the lead member for Environment and Climate Change at Somerset Council, and I have a strong record of delivery. I led the Recycle More initiative, enabling you to recycle more in your blue bags from your doorsteps. I led the climate strategy, recognising it as being the best climate strategy in the country. I also declared an ecological emergency here in Somerset, and I led on the adoption of a tree strategy for the county. So I will be a strong voice for you in Westminster to give this constituency the true representation that we need and we deserve. I want to champion the need for more GP appointments, hold Wessex Water for account for their polluting crimes, and demand bold action on tackling the climate crimes.
Thank you,
So I
Sarah.
have a clear message. If you are fed up with this mess of a Conservative party,
Thank
then
you,
vote
Sarah.
for a Liberal Democrat. Is enough is enough.
Okay. Now that we've done the introductions, we're going to get into the pre-submitted questions. Thank you very much for all of your answers. Thank you for keeping to your time-ins. That was brilliant. If we could start, please, with a question, a pre-submitted question. Is Tricia here?
Hello.
Hello.
What would your top 3 priorities be if you are elected?
Okay. Reminding all candidates, this is 2 minutes to answer the question and we will mix up the order. Please, can we start with Rosie?
Thank you. So my top 3 priorities, were I to be elected, would certainly be the NHS. So public opinion has never been in favour of privatising our NHS, and yet the 2 main parties who've been in power have done that over the last few years. They've been selling off bits via the back door over this whole time. And I believe we need to take that back fully into public ownership, reinvestment, renationalise our NHS fully, because we deserve to have that healthcare for all. Housing, we desperately need to build lots of social housing. A few years ago, the Tory government decided to take the profit from social housing, which is a hugely profitable enterprise, and just funnel that money back into the government rather than reinvesting in social housing, in the stock that we have, and in building more houses. So reversing that decision would be a quick way to get more money into housing. And the other one is public transport, to renationalise our railway and to bring buses into public ownership. Without transportation systems, certainly in our rural communities here, people can't access employment or essential services, and our bigger towns deserve a better rail service than they're getting now. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Sarah next, please.
Thank you. Well, my top 3 priorities, as I'm sure you've seen in some of my leaflets that have been delivered over the course of the last 3 weeks, are calling for better NHS services. As you know, we are living through what is the worst cost of living crisis now for the last 50 years or so. So we need to get people better protected. We've had I think people have been waiting too long, haven't they, for GP appointments? I know certainly if I phone my GP, I not only stay in a queue. I think the last couple of weeks I was on a call and I was 50 in the queue, and I was told to carry on waiting. But I can't get an appointment with a GP for several weeks, and this just isn't good enough. So the Liberal Democrats are going to be calling for better GP services. We've also got ambulance waiting times that are just too long. I know a lady that I spoke to a couple of months ago who had to wait 13 hours after collapsing. She was 93 years old and she sat on a toilet for 13 hours waiting for an ambulance. It's just not good enough. And we've got to tackle this issue around mortgage increases. I don't know how many of you in the room that have had to renegotiate your mortgages over this year, but I know that somebody I spoke to recently, their mortgage has gone up by £700 a month. It is not sustainable. It is just not fair.
Thank you.
It's absolutely disgusting that this government is still, and we are all living the legacy of Liz Truss's mismanagement of the economy. And obviously, thirdly, I would say that the environment is our absolute top priority. Unless we make sure that we reach our ambitions to be carbon zero, then let's face it, there's going to be very few of us left to be able to deal with any of the other issues.
Thank you very much. Next, Neil, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So I'm going to sum it up in a way that my top priority is getting a Labour government in the next year, because that's the change the country needs. We've had 13 years of failure under the Conservatives. I might end up being a bit of a broken record by the end of today, but I need to highlight that. And the change this constituency needs is a change of government. But my top 3 priorities are on the NHS, housing and transport. For the NHS, when Labour left office in 2010, the NHS was the best performing health service in the world. It's absolutely not now. So we'll be investing to double the number of doctors in the NHS in training, so up to 15,000 a year, doubling the number of district nurses, making sure that we're training another 5,000 health visitors across the country and creating 10,000 new nursing and midwifery clinical placements each year, because we need the people within the NHS to deliver the services. We are absolutely committed to the NHS as a service free at the point of delivery to maintain that legacy of the last 75 years of a service that Labour created in the first place. I'm committed to housing. Everybody should have a house and a roof above their head. That's the absolute basic human right. And Labour is committed to making sure we have the social housing, we have the council housing needed to make sure that people have that right. We will reform planning regulations to make sure that local communities are empowered to make local decisions for themselves. But finally, on transport, I work in the highways and transport sector. It is my sector. We are a big rural constituency in a big rural county in a rural region. We are extremely vulnerable to the effect of climate change. You have the network, the rail network, the A303, A358 across the county, and they're extremely vulnerable to the effects of climate change. We had all three of them knocked out in 2014, but you also have really poor bus services across the constituency. Labour would act to make sure people have the control of the local transport. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Faye, next, please.
Thank you. And thank you to Neil and to Sarah for actually outlining some of the plans that government are already bringing in at the moment. The NHS workforce plan is going to be doubling doctors, is increasing nurses. We've already got an extra 12,000 in the last year. So that's happening and I will absolutely be supporting it. I think in my introduction, I talked about my top priorities, cutting rural crime, getting the investment into education, skills and jobs, and making sure that our NHS is protected. But actually my top priority, if you elect me on Thursday, is to continue listening to what members of the public are telling me, to continue talking to business, to find out what they need to be creating those good jobs, to work with developers and communities to make sure our homes are in the right places and the right kind of homes for what we need in these areas and not top-down imposed targets. So I want to work with each and every one of you, work with our communities, and they are very different across the whole constituency, and make sure that I'm using the ear of government to deliver what you need here, what everybody else needs across the constituency, and to deliver on the plans that we have, like the environmental impact plan, which is going to be addressing some of those climate change issues. The work that we're doing with farmers to make sure that as we work past the common agricultural policy, we're getting the right investment for food security, and we're getting the right investment for those who may not be farming, but are stewards of our land and are protecting it, the woodland, the pollinators, the birds. Those plans are all out there, and I will have a voice in government to take what you're telling me about them. If you want them changed in some way, if you think they need to be adapted locally, I will be the one to take that to government, to stand up for our area, to listen to you, and that is my priority, to be your voice in Westminster and make sure that the whole constituency of Somerton and Frome has strong representation.
Thank you. Peter, next, please.
I look around our constituency and I see that there's been very little levelling up down here. Housing. Expansion of population growth has led to pressure on local infrastructure, and greedy developers, along with high land prices, have made it almost impossible for our young and hardworking families to own their property. I would insist that brownfield sites are built on first, and that we protect and maintain greenfield sites. I'm against the Packsaddle development. The Saxonvale development, a good idea. It's built on brownfield sites, but there is no social housing, there is no affordable housing planned on that development. And we need this for our young people. They're working hard, they're our future. They're going to be looking after us in years to come. There is no national mandate for a minimum percentage on affordable and social housing. I would campaign for that hard. It has to be kept. The NHS, a wonderful service, they've looked after me. Will we see it in 75 years' time? Not if it keeps tinkering around the edges. I believe in a cross-party management system, Conservative, Labour, Greens, everybody, to look at the NHS and make sure that it is stable and goes forward for the next 75 years. Thirdly, transport. You're lucky here, you have a railway station. You have a railway station in Castle Carey. And you also happen to have one in Bruton. We don't have one in Somerton. So I would be pushing for that. The bus service is fragmented and not very good. It all needs to come together in an integrated transport system. And I would be pushing hard because at the moment you all depend on your motor car. We need to get away from that. Thank you.
Thank you. Martin, next, please.
Thank you. I think the first thing that I'd probably say in answer to this is I quite like to be a proper MP that represents this constituency because we haven't had one. Because we haven't had one for the past 14 months. You'd expect me to say environment, of course you would, but the environment and climate change actually informs all of our policies in the Green Party. So to talk about the NHS, we need to bring in policies that actually have work for preventative medicine. We need to work with Public Health England to stop people having to be referred to doctors and to hospitals. In terms of adult social care, we need a through line from the NHS into adult social care, not care homes that are divorced from the health system, because then we get bed blocking, and then it goes back to the wards, then it goes into A&E, and there's this and then into the ambulance service. We have to sort the whole thing out, and that needs funding. The other point I would make is about housing. Obviously, as environmentalists, we want sustainable housing, but we have to have housing. We can't just say no to every housing development that comes along. We need to house people, and that means the right place and the right time, the right kind of housing. We need more social housing and more affordable housing. And for far too long, we've let developers off the hook. They've been able to get away with not providing those basic things. And the final thing that I like to come to is, I think I've said my final thing. I do beg your pardon. So I'll shut up. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Lorna.
Oh, right. Regarding the NHS, we would like to go back and reintroduce GP fund holding, which operated in the 1990s very successfully to transform the NHS and make it efficient again. Because of the experiences that we're having with, excuse me, GPs and getting appointments, is all thrust on the NHS. So where doctors can have proper funding to choose where, for instance, the best place is for hip operations, where there's a lower waiting list. All of this we feel would actually make a great difference to the NHS. Also, having been a councillor, I hear a lot of talk about small businesses, and yes, we support small businesses, but I never really saw it. And so our policy is for a turnover tax to be set at 5% initially, which will be a seller's VAT with the same threshold as purchaser's VAT, £85,000. We would offset it against corporation tax, so British companies would pay less. The idea is to get tax off Amazon, Microsoft, Facebook, Starbucks, Shell, etc., who send all their profits abroad and so don't pay corporation tax. We would use the anticipated £40.5 billion raised to get rid of commercial rates to help city centres and high streets. Restore the cuts to benefits to get rid of the 5-week waiting period, a key reason why people attend food banks. And finally, yes, children and schools.
Thank you.
Oh, is that red?
Right, that's question 1 done and out of the way. I'd like to thank the audience for being quite considerate. Thank you. And also to mention that we have asked candidates to set up stalls so that you can give them an earful after the end of the hustings. We have 5 more questions. Is Patricia McCabe here? Patricia? Just getting a microphone sent to you now. Of course. The question that Patricia would like to ask is, what are the candidates' stance on the climate crisis? Okay, be 2 minutes on that. What is the candidate's stance on the climate crisis? Okay, we'll start with you, Lorna. Let's see where the last one to go.
All right. Right, I probably am going to shock everybody. I read a paper from Cambridge University, and I have to say, I don't believe in it. So, my turn to talk. My turn.
Thank you. Thank you. Please carry on, Lorna.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. People, I refer to COVID. How many people took an untried, untested jab? How many? How many? I think we have to really research what we're told today, because
Thank you for letting the candidate answer. Carry on, Lorna.
oh, right. Because truth is not spoken. People's agendas in politics and to get re-elected, or whether they're bought. Why? I mean, I mentioned earlier about Amazon and Microsoft. Why has nothing been done about the profits that they take away from this nation? You have to start asking questions. Why things are as they are? Who's going to benefit? And where's the money being made? I think I've finished.
Thank you, Lorna. Martin, please.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think I was in the Green Party when it was the Ecology Party, when we were considered sort of harbingers of doom and complete nutcases, frankly. Nobody actually believed in climate change. I think now we have the evidence from about 99% of climatologists, climate scientists, NASA, institutes of learning that actually say we have climate change. I think more important, we might just simply use our senses, which if you look at the weather forecast in Southern Europe at the moment, with temperatures raising 45 degrees, enormous floods. These things are going to get worse. These extremes in temperature are going to get worse. It's not too late to do something about it. We can actually act. I don't think we can turn the clock back and make up for all the time we've wasted, but we can do something. We can make ourselves more resilient and try to do more with our building and maybe with our reservoirs, with our management of water, to try and prevent this from happening. And there are so many knock-on effects, not in the least the problem of people evacuating other places in which they live. If you think the refugee issue is a difficult one to deal with, we're going to see a lot more of that in the future. And we've got to learn to be a more accepting country and learn to, and within the whole of Europe, learn that we may be a very crowded area if we're going to have a humane and compassionate answer to this. Thank you.
Thank you. Neil, please. Neil.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to echo to a certain extent what Martin was just talking about. I do want to reassure people here that the Labour Party absolutely takes the climate emergency seriously. Unlike Rishi Sunak, who went off to a follow-up meeting to COP26, we had the opportunity to meet with the German Chancellor and the French President. He went off to dinner with Rupert Murdoch's birthday party. Keir Starmer, as leader of the Labour Party, is absolutely committed to the change we need to see in the UK. So we are absolutely committed to making sure that we are be a clean energy producer by 2030. In order to achieve that, we're going to have a £28 billion fund per year to make sure we make that change that we need to see. So we're going to double our onshore wind capacity, triple solar capacity, and quadruple offshore wind capacity. We're going to make sure we're going to end exploration licenses in the North Sea. And hopefully people have seen Keir Starmer talking about that nationally. So that is real change. So while other parties may talk, about that change. The next Labour government's actually going to do it. We're going to set up an independent GB energy company to make sure that we reduce energy bills by £1,400 per year. That's an absolute commitment. We're going to support businesses to make sure they make that transition. We're going to invest in renewables. The Southwest can be a net producer of renewable energy. We have abundant wind, geothermal, solar, and tidal power around this peninsula, and that can be a net contributor to the UK, making sure it meets what it needs to do in terms of producing renewable energies. I just want to make sure that people are absolutely clear that the Labour Party, the next Labour government, will do what we need to do to make sure we meet this climate emergency, because we really need to. We've had serious floodings in Somerset. I mean, we could talk about internationally, but here in Somerset, we've had severe flooding in 2014 on Somerset levels. Projections will show that the Somerset levels become uninhabitable in the next 30 years if we do not take serious measures to address it. So it's a real problem, and only Labour will address it in government.
Thank you, Neil. Peter, please.
I'm probably going to surprise you here. I do believe that we need to do something about it, but this is a balance. We have people, hardworking people, poor people, pensioners. They're struggling now during the summer to put food on the table. Come the winter, they're going to be struggling to heat their homes. So can we not just move this down the road, maybe about a year, 18 months, 2 years? I know it's a problem, but we have to balance here on what people around us need. So in 2 years' time, we'll have better technology. We'll have AI to help us. Well, trust me, we will, okay? We rely on the car in this constituency. The vast majority rely on a car. We need to get out of green technology like hydrogen, all right? Forget EVs. That is the way forward, and other technologies. So my answer to you is, let's deal with the cost of living crisis. Let's make sure that our economy is stable. Let's look after the vulnerable people in our society right now, and then look at that once our economy is stable in a year, 18 months time. Thank you.
Thank you. Faye, please.
Thank you. So I voted for both the climate emergency and the ecological emergency as a county councillor. I was actually the member responsible for taking our county council paper free, which saved over 1 million pages of paper in the first year. And that was the first thing I did when I got elected. Now, we need to make sure that digital access is available to those who can get it, and some people will still need paper, and we need to make sure whatever we do in addressing the climate emergency, that we are taking everybody along with us. One of the ways that I did that as a county councillor, as the education cabinet member, I explored how we could get more solar panels onto schools, better insulation, so those schools had lower energy bills, so that they weren't having to take energy from the grid and that they could spend their money on education. And I was really pleased with that portfolio that I managed to push forward the first passive house carbon neutral school that is currently under construction in Taunton. And I'm glad to see that that continued after we lost control of the council. In terms of the wider picture, we need to make sure we're working with business. I think that at the moment, we've got some amazing technologies and clean energy, green energy in this county, and hopefully in this constituency can be a really big part of how we grow the economy. I was talking to the Energy Security Secretary just the other day about getting solar panels on all of our industrial and farm building roofs. We can stop taking out agricultural land, whether it's low grade or high grade, from the food security system and generate 45 gigawatts of energy from our rooftops alone in this country. Now, that's about 2/3 of what we need. We need to make sure that we're encouraging those land users and farmers to be keeping with biodiversity, working through the environmental impact plan. And again, on flooding, I was with the flooding minister just the other day, looking at the impacts of those flash floods that we had, but also talking about the initiatives we've got for frequent flooding. Somerset set up the Somerset Rivers Authority, which is a bastion to all other places that flood, in 2014 in reaction to those floods. And I will push to make sure that we continue as government to do everything we can to protect this area.
Thank you, Faye. Rosie, please.
Thank you. Just going to quote the words of one of my personal heroes. To anyone that is denying against all of the science that the climate crisis is real, how dare you? Our approach to maintaining our livable environment and tackling climate change needs to come from an economic standpoint. Currently, we're allowing large oil companies to dictate how we produce our energy and the prices we pay. Bringing everything in-house by nationalising our energy means we've got far more say in how investment is made going forward into greener solutions. Up to 50% of Somerset is due to be frequently or permanently flooded by 2050. Investing in wind energy now will future-proof the county against the flooding. And obviously it's a greener choice going forward. So that's what we need to invest in here. But nationalising the energy also just gives us more choice. Bringing it in-house lets us make those decisions ourselves rather than letting the oil companies make those decisions for us. Also, obviously, improving our public transport systems means we can move towards using them more and using our cars less. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you. Coming from a farming background, the environment is really, really important to me. Climate change and the environment is the reason that I got into local government, and I am particularly passionate about it. The government has a really appalling track record when it comes to climate change and our environment. So much so that the climate change minister in the Lords resigned only recently. Rishi Sunak doesn't care about the environment. He was embarrassed into attending COP26 by Boris Johnson. Now, the government should be leading the world in tackling this climate crisis. It promised it at COP26, but instead, progress is stalling. We've got coal in Cumbria, we've got oil fields in Surrey, and our friend Jacob Rees-Mogg across the way is happy to have fracking in his garden. We see it first here in Somerset. Water companies continue to pump raw sewage into our precious rivers and streams. Wessex Water has dumped nearly 80,000 times, over 500,000 hours over the last 3 years. It stinks. I've got a great track record of delivering on environment, as I've said in my introduction: recycle more, ecological emergency, chairing the cross-party group on the environment strategy, getting that delivered. I've got EV scooters into Yeovil. I've given out wildflower seeds so communities can get involved in developing biodiversity green corridors in marginal green areas. We've planted trees right across the district, and we've committed through our tree strategy to upping our tree canopy from what is 8% to 14% over the next 10 years. I can deliver on this and I will take it forward.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Just before the next question, I'd like to remind the candidates here that you are in Frome, sitting in front of a room full of Frome residents. I'm going to ask that you answer your questions with some Frome-centric answers as well, please. Going into the next question is Neil Howlett in the audience. Neil? Okay, Richard, you're going to ask on Neil's behalf.
Yeah, I'm asking on Neil's behalf. I haven't got my glasses, so I think I should remember the question. How often have you been to Frome in the last 12 months? And what did you do when you were here?
Thank you, Richard. Okay, we're going to kick off with Sarah, please.
Thank you very much. Well, I can confidently say I'm in Frome quite a lot. As I said in the introduction, my partner lives here in Frome, and growing up as I did just down the road near Wincanton, I've been here over the years many, many times to the Frome cattle market and such like, and I used to have the best experience going to a lovely little tack shop in Frome that I was obsessed with, being pony mad when I was little. So Frome is, I would like to say, my home. I know it very well, and I have spent so much time in Frome. But for me, my partner is a patient at Frome GP. Now, she struggles to get an appointment, and my stepdaughter gets to struggle to see an appointment when they need it. The staff in Frome Medical Centre do a brilliant job. We know how hard they work, but they are stretched too thin. And this is what I have seen over and over again, not just in Frome, everywhere across the constituency. You know, we've lost 50 GPs in recent years, and there's now something like 2,100 patients to every single GP. So I've also looked into the Beckington Family Service as well, just outside Frome, and they're under just as much pressure. And the other day, I had a walk down and looked at the River Frome, and we did some water testing there, and it's polluted. And so that is what I've seen, the disgusting, stinking sewage that is being pumped into our rivers. And also I've had some involvement with the Hungerford Wild Swimming Group there. They're trying to get swimming status. And I tell you what, this government is making it really difficult for them to get that swimming status. And I will work hard to make sure that happens as well.
Thank you. Rosie, please.
Hi. So I've lived in Frome for the last 8 years, but I was born and grew up just the other side of Warminster. So I've been coming to Frome all my life. So I live here. I work actually based in Westbury, but because I'm a train conductor, I work on trains that come through Frome almost every day. So I also spend a lot of my leisure time here. I come to events here at the Cheese and Grain. I enjoy all of our local restaurants and cafes. I've got friends that own small businesses in the town, and I really appreciate that we've got that thriving sort of small business community here. I walk my dog in the countryside in and around Frome. I really enjoy that. I swim at Farley Hungerford and at Fobster because I enjoy outside swimming. I spend a lot of time here. I've got really wonderful friends here, and I love living here, and that is why I'm standing. I am the only independent here. I'm just an ordinary person working a full-time job alongside this. But I feel really passionately about representing the people in this community because we've really not had that representation for the last 14 months or for the last however many years, because I don't see a presence in Frome of our MP at any point since I've started living here. So that's what I'd like to do if you gave me the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, please.
I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. I've been here 3 times in the last 12 months. I live in Somerton at the far end of the constituency, but I was invited to the farmers market. And what a wonderful market you have. It's thriving and it's fantastic. I also came here because this was recommended to me as well, and a lovely cafe that you've got. So I had a walk through Frome, and I've been over here leafletting. But you have exactly the same issues here as I walk around the town that I notice in Somerton. And these need to be addressed. We're looking at a local level here. It's great for the big parties up there in Westminster and Westminster geocentric. But how many people come down and walk around your streets and ask you questions and find out what your real issues are? And that's what I'm about. I'm a normal person. I worked up my way up through the military. I wasn't born with a spoon in my mouth. And I'm here to represent you as local people the best I can. I've got the moral compass and the moral backbone to stand up in the House of Westminster and campaign for what really matters to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Faye, please.
Thanks. So as Lisa and others on the town council will know, before about 5 years ago, I don't remember if I came to Frome. I grew up in Somerset and I may have come as a young child, but I'm not going to pretend that I'm here all the time. But 5 years ago, I got involved as a county councillor, both from the education point of view, working with Berkeley School just outside Frome, where 96 out of the 98 children there come from Frome, looking at how we could make sure that education was dealt with well here. Then, as I worked through the transformation programme at the County Council, I got very involved with the Frome Town Council because you've got such a great model of community here, and it was something that people were talking to me about, and we wanted to look to see how devolution in this county could work well. And talking to Frome and Paul and colleagues about what could happen here was really exciting. In the last year, probably about 10, 15 times probably, including recently having a chat with Lisa about how we could help Frome to get that devolution. And also my colleague who worked on the unitary business case with me lives here in Frome. And it was always very much a model about what you can do well if you have a community who thrives together. Also, my good friend, your local councillor, Dawn Denton, has introduced me to many of the wonders of Frome since she was elected in 2022, and I've enjoyed supporting her and the amazing work that she does with your community. So I don't live here, I don't come here every single day or every single week, but as your MP, I would be looking to listen to you, to take the lessons of what you've done so well in Frome and to make sure that we can replicate that across the constituency, but also some of the things that you've done here that I could take to government and make recommendations for how that can work as communities around our country. So I look to Frome as a really great example of things. I hope that I can bring other great methods to Frome as well. And I really look forward to seeing what Frome does when it sets its plan for devolution.
Thank you. Neil.
Thank you, Chair. So I don't live in Frome either. I'm from the other side of the county. I live in Taunton at the moment. I was born in Shepton Mallet. I spent the first few years of my life in Pilton. I am a champion for Somerset, though. I think it's a brilliant part of the world. I think it's a really great place to bring your family and raise a family, which is why I'm doing it with my own. But I do know Frome. I've visited many times over the past few weeks. But prior to that, my day job as a worker as civil engineer, I deliver highways works across the county. We have a depot in Frome, and I do deliver schemes in this part of the county. My other role that I'm very involved in is I'm the chair and regional convener of Unison, which is the biggest trade union in the country and the union for public sector workers. So I also know very well the public services that are provided across Somerset, but also here in the former Mendip area, but particularly in Frome. What I have also been doing is knocking on a lot of doors over the past few weeks, trying to understand what people's priorities are within this constituency, what they would want from a new MP to replace David Warburton. Now, it's very clear to me that despite the facade of prosperity within Frome, it's a lovely place. There are still pockets of social deprivation in Frome that mirror a lot of the issues you have across Somerset as a whole. You have relatively poor public services in the county that they struggle to deliver across the rural area, a vast area. We have some of the lowest social progression in the country. And those need to be addressed, and it's only Labour that can do that. And it's only an active Labour MP in this constituency, championing this constituency in House of Commons and working with the next Labour government that can do that. And I want to give you that commitment that I will do that on your behalf, that only a Labour MP can do that for this constituency.
Thank you. Martin.
I feel that I might be at a slight advantage in answering this question. Yeah, well, thank you for the question anyway. I'm glad we're not in Martok. Yes, Frome, I've been here 40 years. I'm actually like to get out from time to time. I came here 40 years ago to teach at Frome Community College. I went away for a while and I stayed here, but worked in street, taught there, came back and actually got a management position in this hall. And also I took on the role of director of the Frome Festival, and I'm very grateful I'm not director of the Frome Festival this week. One thing that's always been apparent to me about Frome, and I think this is why we have this great sense of independent in the way we think and in our politics, is that we're on the edge. We've been put artificially on the edge of everything. So we're right on the edge, the northeast edge of Somerset. We have absolutely no relationship at all with Taunton, and yet Taunton is where everything happens in Somerset. we were right on the edge of the Mendip district as well. And that seemed rather unfair because we were the biggest town, but we weren't the town in the middle. So we didn't get much notice there. And I know when I've been to County Taunton, trying to get public services up here or consultations here, I often find that Frome is bypassed. They don't bring things here. And I say, why not? And they say, well, we don't know if you have any venues. I said, well, I do know a few. And so we in Frome look more, I think, towards Bath, to Radstock and so on. We don't look really much to Somerset. And I think this has made us a much more independent town in a funny kind of way. And over the last few years, we've seen this town absolutely flourish.
Thank you. Okay. Do we have Neil Howlett? Neil Howlett, are you?
Have you done those questions?
Have I done Neil's? Oh, yes, I have. Apologies, Richard. Yes, I have. Yes, he doesn't have another question.
Hello.
Oh, goodness me. I'm so sorry, Lorna.
That's all right.
I'm so sorry. It's Lorna's turn.
Okay. I've lived in Somerset for over 30 years and I brought up 4 children here. And it was quite a transformation and a huge learning experience. And I am just the other side of the border in the Wells constituency, and I was elected onto the council there. But at the moment, well, over the 30 years, I've been surrounded by farming and understand, got a few sheep myself, understand a little bit about farming. But I've also been staggered at the amount of houses that are being built on farmland. And being on the council, I found out that a lot of the time brownfield sites were not being built on because it basically costs the developer more money to clean up a brownfield site than go to a nice pasture land and just do their building. Frome, I have enjoyed getting to know, and because of leafleting and knocking on doors and listening to people. Of course, you have the same flooding issues that we do in Wells. And during the process on the council, I was part of the Axenbrew Drainage Board. And I remember only too well a farmer telling me that he gave up one of his fields for flooding and the government paid him money. I just feel that we need to sort flooding out because it drains nutrition out of the ground for a start. And obviously it can wreck people's homes. So I would really want to have a look at that. And also the pollution, which I understand you've had here.
Thank you, Lorna, and apologies again. Do we have Catherine Norris? Catherine? Okay. I will ask the question on Catherine's behalf. Catherine is a local resident, patient, previous carer, and works full-time for the local NHS as a pharmacist in both general practice and community pharmacy. She'd like to know how each candidate intends to increase GP appointments in the area, whilst also protecting the well-being of staff members within the NHS, as many are choosing to leave the profession due to poor working conditions. Okay, we'll start with Neil, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I previously referenced that I was regional convener of the trade union Unison. Unison represents thousands of healthcare workers in the NHS. So I'm saying that so you know, not only am I a Labour person, I'm also a trade unionist who believes in the NHS and represents workers in the NHS. The Labour Party is absolutely committed to maintaining the NHS as a service free at the point of delivery. We are focused, laser-like focused on outcomes. When we left office in 2010, the NHS was the best healthcare service in the world. It's clearly not anymore. In this constituency, you have some of the worst cancer referral waiting times meeting their targets in the country. That needs to change. That can only change through a Labour government that's going to invest in the NHS. And I can't give you a promise that I can fix that now. If I was elected now in this by-election, we still got a Conservative government in the way, failing to manage the NHS in the way it should be. The only way the Labour Party can do what needs to be done is to get the Conservatives out of the way, have a general election, come in and make the change that needs to happen. We are committed to making sure we increase the number of GP training places. The Conservatives, I mean, I'm sure Faye's going to talk about it in a second about their plan for the NHS in terms of staffing. It took them 13 years to come up with a 15-year plan. Okay, the Labour Party in 2003 had a workforce plan, which saw us through to the end of 2010. So the commitment I will give is that the Labour Party will make sure that the NHS lasts another 75 years. And that's what I'll be committed to if I'm your MP.
Thank you. Could we go to Martin, please?
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the things we have to do is to recruit more GPs. It's not simply a case that we've fallen back for 13 years of underfunding. And you can't just bring funding in suddenly. It's got to be consistent over a period of time. So when we're looking at GPs, we need, of course, to raise salaries. We need to raise nurses' salaries. We need to look at the spending on the infrastructure of our crumbling buildings. And we have an aging population. So what might have been acceptable 13 years ago isn't now, because we actually need the NHS more than we ever did. The only way to do this is to invest. And in order to invest, we have to do the one thing that politicians often don't like talking about, and that's taxation. We need, thank you, we need to tax the top 1% in this country. The difference between the rich and the poor in this country has grown exponentially, massively, even in the last 20 years, not just the last 13. We need to also stop offshore loopholes for people investing. And I actually agree with the candidate on my right. We need to look at some of the corporations that manage to escape taxation and pay their money. I think it's Amazon, pay their money into Luxembourg. We need to get some of this money back. You know, and also the taxation needs to be fairer across them. We shouldn't have people paying as much tax as they are, given the little they earn. So that's the answer.
Thank you, Martin. Lorna, please.
All right, thank you. Who here remembers that when the NHS was set up in 1948, that it was so that it could be sickness could be eliminated? Does anybody remember that was the reason for it? Yeah, thank you. Yes, well, I have had, yes, a lot of the problem is that I think it's being now abused. It's like a safety net rather than, as somebody emailed me earlier, what about nutrition? What about helping ourselves? And I remember during the, when we had COVID, I heard nobody talking about our immune systems. We all have an immune system, and we should have been actually told how to look after it, what to do to keep it up and running. And so I just mention that because, but also doctors are working part-time. They've kind of given up a lot. So
thank you. Lorna, please carry on.
right, okay. So regarding the NHS, I've already said that we would reintroduce GP fund holding and give them more money to do what they're good at. And so takes pressure off the NHS, but also, of course, look at the management of the NHS. But I think actually we need to do a lot to help ourselves to just stay healthy. certainly with the food that we have in this country, we surely need to do that, and to make sure that food banks are being given healthy food too.
Thank you, Lorna. Rosie, please.
Thank you. So I believe the question was more about GP appointments and staffing levels in our NHS. So the same with any of our public services. For teachers, for example, if you want to retain and recruit quality staff, you have to value them. You have to pay them fairly for the work they do, which we can all agree is incredible work. So the solution seems fairly simple to me, is to pay them properly, is to not overwork them, not expect them to work millions of hours of overtime to then be able to earn a livable wage. Is for us to treat them with the respect they deserve. And it's also, in terms of recruitment, we need to go back to the older ways of, for example, training nurses, where they learn on the job while they're being paid, so that they don't need to get into debt in which to qualify. I worked myself as a carer for 6 years and loved it and miss it every day. But I could no longer afford to live on the wage. I would love to have trained to have been a nurse, but I couldn't afford it, having already done 4 years at university. So if that were possible, I'd possibly be a nurse now in our NHS, and maybe one day that will be possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter, please.
I was lucky enough to visit my local doctor just last week. And whilst sitting in the waiting room, I noticed little signs saying 372 appointments were missed in the month of March. That is a lot of time and a lot of waste of doctors' time. So we need to do something. I haven't an answer for this one, but we need to do something to stop that wastage of appointments, because that would free up a lot more people to get in there. Perhaps, and I'm only throwing this out there, that if you didn't turn up, you had a minor fine of maybe £5 that went towards that GP surgery. Going on to the NHS is a wonderful system. They treated me for cancer. I'm cured. I can't thank them enough. I think they're absolute angels. However, there is an issue at the other end of people in beds that can't go home. They don't have the care. Well, it costs £1,800 a day to keep somebody, a week in a bed in a hospital. It costs £1,200 to put them in a care home. So why are we not being able to take over a load of care homes, put the care in there that's required, so they can leave the hospital, go to the care home, and they can save £600 to £800 a week. That could be then reinvested into the National Health Service. It makes it a more efficient service because there are more beds available. As for nurses, by golly, yes, they do need a pay rise. And indeed the doctors. I think they're wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, please.
Thank you. Well, I think our nurses, doctors and paramedics are heroes. They're trying to keep us safe, but they've been badly let down by this Conservative government. We should be celebrating our amazing NHS service and everyone that serves in it. So the Liberal Democrats want to make sure everybody can get to a GP within 7 days or 24 hours in an emergency. That simply isn't happening at the moment. And we want to recruit 8,000 more GPs into service. That may be through return to work or training. And we want to do that by closing the loopholes where super wealthy benefit from tax-free allowances worth over £1 billion a year. But you know what? We also need to look into our social care as well. I saw my dad yesterday for the first time for about 3 weeks. It was really painful. He's got severe dementia. He didn't recognise me. He didn't recognise Ed Davey either.
Quite a few people.
But do you know what we've got to do in all seriousness? I mean, that was really hard to me. And I also saw my mum. She's at home caring for him 24/7. She doesn't have access to any support by 1.5 hours a week if she pushes for it. And it's disgusting. We've got an aging population here in Somerset, and the government has just left the market to provide social care. It's underfunded the local authorities that have to pay for those that need care, and they just can't afford it. It's unsustainable, and people are suffering.
Thank you. Lastly, Faye.
Thank you. And firstly, thank you to Catherine. I mean, our pharmacists do an amazing job, and actually pharmacists are part of the solution to the question that Catherine is asking. I have friends who work in pharmacy who did amazing things during COVID, vaccinations and working within our communities. And I'm really pleased to see the government has introduced legislation so that pharmacists can do some of the appointments that might otherwise be waiting to see GPs. And I think that's part of the solution.
Thank you.
I think that's part of the solution, is making sure that we're offering a broad scope of health services. So GPs are absolutely essential within that. We've had 5,000 extra in the last year alone. The removal of the cap on pension reforms, meaning more are coming back into work, and I hope will continue to qualify, like some proud parents I can see in the room whose son qualified as a doctor just yesterday. But what I'd like to see is making sure that we're using the investment we've got in health checks that were announced a few weeks ago, so that people can get things checked out, catch them early. So hopefully we can be treating them, caring for them before it becomes something that needs a GP. The community diagnostic centres that are cutting the waiting for those tests to make sure we're catching cancer early and getting that treatment done. And GPs make up an integral part of a whole system that we're investing in. There's the £2.4 million into the workforce plan, which absolutely is looking towards the future and future-proofing those skills. Just this week, we agreed pay rises for our nurses, for our paramedics, for our doctors, for our pharmacists. And it's really important that we continue to work with them to make sure that we've got a sustainable NHS, and training and skills and aspiration for young people. And I agree entirely, actually, you know, training on the job. We've talked about apprenticeships for doctors. I'd love to see more training on the job. My cousin qualified as a nurse in that way. And we need to be pulling all of the strings to make sure our communities are resilient, that people have access to the right health at the right time, and take some of the pressure off GPs by using all of the things that are available to us.
Thank you. Can I remind our audience that after the hustings, they will be on the tables, and you can say pretty much whatever you would like to them then. Thank you for being such a great audience, and thank you to Peter as well for keeping excellent time. We have a couple more questions. Laura and Rachel, I'm just letting you, Paul, I'm just letting you know I'm going to mix up these questions a little bit. Is Billy? Billy. Thank you, Billy.
I'd like to ask you, what are your plans for our youth services and the mental health issues that they all have?
Thank you. We're going to start with Peter for this one, please.
Okay, I used to be a scout leader and indeed an explorer leader. I also ran the Army Cadet Force in Langport. It's important that our young people are given a focus. Too many are just left to roam the streets for many reasons. Maybe their parents don't particularly care. Some are headstrong and just want to get out there in the world. We need to be able to teach to these young people what the world is about. It's not about forming lines for them. Everybody is different. Everybody has a diversity. But we need to get them and mold them into the people of the future. So I would like to see more clubs that they can go to that they have an interest in. Some don't like youth clubs. It's not their thing. Others, it's music and those sort of media things that are out there, which quite honestly, I'm an old folk, I don't really know. but that's what they're interested in. And we need to be able to mold them into that direction where they want to go. So we need to fund that. How do we fund that? There's calls all the time on our taxes for everything. So let's look at it closely. Where can we get the taxes from? Personally, I mentioned it before, we push the green thing down the road by a year, 18 months, and revisit that then and use those green taxes now to try and find a way of helping our people. In Somerton, we have a big problem with ASB, a real big problem with ASB. And I used to be a magistrate and I dealt with young people. They need a second chance. They deal with ASB because they're bored. Let's give them something to focus on and make their life really fantastic in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Rosie, please.
Thank you. So often when talking about crime rates, for example, and policing, people often neglect to mention that addressing the causes of antisocial behaviour in a much more holistic and less demonising way usually has a better effect on the problem, especially amongst younger people. Thank you. If you give people a decent quality of life, look after their mental and physical health, treat them with respect and dignity, and fulfill their need for leisure activities, it becomes far more difficult for that person to end up on the wrong path. However, the latest estimates state that 1 in 6 adults experienced a common mental disorder, such as depression or anxiety, in the past week, and 1 in 6 children aged between 6 and 16 experienced a common mental disorder in 2021. Yet only a third of them who were diagnosed are getting any kind of treatment, according to the charity Mind. Same as all of our NHS services, mental health services are impossibly stretched and underfunded. We need to see waiting lists for people seeking mental health support as something that doesn't put people off. When somebody's in crisis and have taken the steps to reach out for help, if they're then told they need to wait 6, 9, possibly over a year, that is going to be something that puts them off, and it's something that makes them take a step back from asking for help in the first place. These people need our urgent help so that they don't get to a situation of crisis. So we need investment in our mental health services now.
Thank you. Faye, please.
Thank you. So from a youth services point of view, I think it's really pertinent here in Frome. One of the trials that we did when we were looking at devolution is around what young people could be doing in Frome and the surrounding parishes. And I think the community has a massive part in what we can do with youth services. I was certainly lucky enough to be a brownie, a venture scout, and get involved in those kind of community things where you learn about serving the community, about working as a team and having things available. I think we also see that in our schools. I was talking to our police and crime commissioner the other day about the amazing work that our police are doing in schools. We have little mini police officers in our primary schools who are patrolling the playgrounds, learning about responsibility and really taking an active role in their school community. And then with our community officers going into our secondary schools and continuing that kind of civilian information to them, I think there's great opportunity. But we do need to make sure that every community has a way of being able to engage with young people. And it's not about demonizing, it's about giving them the aspirations so they believe that they can achieve. When it comes to mental health services, that's something that's really close to my heart. My own son had some very serious mental health problems. And I recognise that one of the biggest challenges that I had as a parent is not knowing where to go. And as an MP, I would want to be a person who can help signpost people who have been in the same position that I have, because there is help out there and our NHS is fantastic. A friend of mine is the CEO of Somerset Mind, and he was one of the key things that actually was able to direct me to be able to help my son. And I want to make sure that we've got that resilience in our schools for our young people, that we're not forgetting those who have grown older before those services happen, because we've got a generation in the middle who might not have had that resilience and they need to know where to go. And a good MP and a good community structure can hold those people when they really need it. And that is something that I will be pushing for. Parity between mental and physical health is a passion that I will pursue.
Thank you. Martin, please.
Yeah, thanks. We've seen in Frome over the years the closure of our youth services and the diminution of them. They've been they were very important at one time. I remember at Frome College we had a youth wing. There was effectively a youth club that children go to, students could go to after school, and over a period of time, successive cuts have cut away those things that were not frivolous by any means. They were very important. In fact, at one time, Frome College was called Frome Community College, and it worked very hard to get that designation so that we saw people quite naturally staying on after school, adults coming in to take community education classes, and a rich mixture of things that could be done in those after school hours. And all of that has gone, and it's very sad, and it's been replaced by a lot of individual projects which have been very good, things like football clubs, and some people have said other arts facilities, for example, wonderful for the arts in this town. But some of these things cost, and they also cost a lot of time for parents having to drop their children off. There are very few bus services, so we have to invest. I think rather than banging on about taxation as such, I think there's one chink of light, that in the new unitary Somerset Council, we're looking at something called LCNs, local community networks. And I think this might be the thing that where we can actually develop youth services and maybe charge a little bit more on the community tax for the parishes and for the town to deal with those things, so that we can actually start to rebuild that infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah, please.
Thank you. Well, we need to be ambitious and aspirational for our young people in Somerton and Frome, Somerset, and across the country. And that's not being done at the moment. You know, for me, it starts at school. Somerton and Frome schools get less than £367 less per pupil than the national average. The Conservatives have slashed funding for Somerset schools by 3.1 million through their stealth cuts to free school meals or the pupil premium. That is not good enough. And alongside that, our youth services have been decimated. We've got to be ambitious for our children, and it starts in our schools. Now, as far as mental health is concerned, one of my best friends founded actually a mental health charity called Time for Change. And she did that after her own struggles with suicide, which I was very close to at the time that she tried to take her own life. So I know how difficult it is for people to struggle with mental health issues. And I know how difficult it is for young people having a stepdaughter with autism who does struggle also with social anxiety. So for me, mental health is as important as physical health, and we must take it seriously.
Thank you. Neil, please.
So it's one of the sad realities of life. Unless you actually have children or cause to use some of these services, you're not necessarily aware of how much youth services, mental health services have been diminished over the last decade at least. I'm actually friends with the person who was virtually the last youth worker in Somerset. She now works in Cornwall. We don't really have a youth service in Somerset. That was eliminated under the last Conservative administration at Somerset County Council. So we have an absolute crisis in youth services in Somerset, combined with a mental health crisis for our young people, and also a special educational needs crisis in our schools. My wife's a teacher. She works in a large secondary school in the county. The challenges our teaching colleagues are facing is absolutely massive in terms of child welfare in schools. It's really quite a depressing situation, really. And partly that's a cause of the reduction in early intervention in families over the last decade as well. So family support workers have also been massively cut back at Somerset County Council. but also special educational needs provision in school has been massively reduced as well due to the budget issues that Sarah has just referenced. I think where Labour is coming from, if you look at where we were when we were in power, we had the Sure Start system in place to support families. We wanted to make sure that families were given that early provision to address problems before they started. But we would absolutely make sure the mental health treatment is provided within a month for everybody and provide specialist mental health support in every single school to support pupils before issues escalate. And we would pay for that by ending the VAT exemption in private schools. So we would be raising more money from that elimination of the VAT exemption to pay for that extra additional resource within schools. We absolutely need to make sure our young people are supported and the provision is there to make sure that they live happy, successful lives in the future.
Thank you. Lorna.
Thank you. I have to ask myself, how much talent have we lost through mental health in our children or some kind of problem, trauma even? And I know that children, because they've told me, have thought of committing suicide. So I think this is a very serious problem. And I think it starts at home. I think whether it's a single mum or in a family, it's a hard task being a mother, and maybe supporting mothers a little bit more, understanding that the day-to-day routine isn't exactly exciting at times. But for children to do well at school, they need to feel safe. They need to feel that they're loved and that they have food and that they can be happy. If there's a trauma or something going on at home, because I've met people in those circumstances, learning at school, really, it just goes over their head. So I think mental well-being is a very important issue. I also know that there are some schools where a child who doesn't succeed will actually go out of their way to look for what the child actually is good at, because it's not sort of one thing fits all, because every child is unique. And I'd like to see every child being given a real chance to show their potential, because they're our future, aren't they? Yeah, and I'd just like to finish by saying that working with animals can be a tremendous benefit for children who are coming out of a trauma of some sort, loss of a parent, accident, whatever. That is one thing that can be done, and we're in the countryside, so maybe that needs to be explored. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, two more questions pre-selected, and then I do believe we should have a little bit of time for some questions from the audience. Peter, could I ask you please to ask Charlotte Carter's question, unless Charlotte Carter is here? No? Peter, can you do the honors, please?
The question is, how will you address the early years childcare issues in Frome? Nurseries shutting down, not enough places, not enough funding, high costs.
Thank you. We'll start with Faye, please.
Thanks, Lisa. So early years is essential to making sure that our young people get a good start in life. And one of the things that I'm really pleased that was announced recently is the move to introduce childcare from the age of 9 months. So if parents want to go back to work, they have that opportunity. Now, that's obviously being phased in over a period of time, because if you suddenly say every child can go and get 30 hours of early years from one day, then there won't be the capacity in the workplace. What we've done is increase the funding that will go with that as well. So I've been talking to nurseries about how their business model works, how that can actually support them. And over the next 18 months, we will see that increase, the age coming down, the hours going up, so that our parents who want to go to work can access that. It's absolutely key that you have a local MP who will be feeding back to the government, to be talking to them about how that is working in our individual communities, making sure that the funding that will channel through some from the local authority and some directly to individuals. And I'm really pleased that universal credit payments for childcare will now be upfront for the first time ever. So it's not a case of having to find the money upfront and your benefits will pay you later. So we're putting all the tools in place to make sure people are able to, one, run nurseries that are sustainable, two, expand those to make sure that we can complete that provision down to the 9-month mark from where we are at the moment with 2 years, and three, give parents that opportunity to be part of our communities, to go out to work if they choose to, and know that their young people are being cared for in good establishments, that they haven't got to worry about finding the money up front, and that they can contribute to society without feeling like they should be guilted into staying at home to look after their children. I went back to work when my son was really young. It wasn't the easiest thing to find childcare, and I'm really excited to see how we can make sure this rolls out correctly across the whole of Somerton and Frome.
Thank you. Peter, please.
Somerton Frome. It's not just Somerton and Frome, it's Somerton, Frome, Wincanton, Castle Carey, Bruton, and all the villages in between. And we need to look after our young people at that very early age. I don't know much about the child provision here in Frome, but I can tell you that in Somerton, in Edgar Hall, we have 2 groups of volunteers that run very early age mother and toddlers groups, and we support them and we give them money to ensure that that facility goes through, and it's absolutely thriving. You can hardly get in there on a Monday morning. But what about childcare once they move on from there? Yes, it's absolutely imperative that we can take these young preschool people and allow their parents to go out and work and bring that money in and be successful and move on with life. How do we fund that? Well, I'm going to be pretty blunt with you. The only way really in communities is that through local councils that are getting more and more pressure put on them from Somerset Council to do more work. So I'm right behind our council in Somerton in trying to make more child provision available. We have some good child provision outlets up on the trading estate in Somerton, but we need more. But we need to use the facilities that we got to get these young people in with some great volunteers and make them the next generation that move on to junior school and then onwards through life. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Sarah, please.
Thank you. Well, it's clear that early years childcare simply isn't getting enough funding, is it? It's woefully underfunded, particularly so in rural areas. You don't need to go very far in Somerton and Frome to find several early years childcare facilities closing down. So, you know, I've talked to teachers over the course of this campaign and over the last year, and teachers are telling me, and childcare providers are telling me that, you know, sometimes they were choosing between pens, paper or heating in their establishment. Parents have told me that they've gone hungry over the last year in order to feed their children. This isn't the right way for our children to be growing up. You know, we've got choices. We need to fund children's education properly, and that is from the very, very start of their education. So come on, let's get on with it. Let's give childcare and early years childcare the right type of funding to give our children the best quality education that they deserve.
Thank you. Lorna, please.
Yes, childcare. I'm sorry, but we were given a referendum in 2016 to take charge of our borders and to limit immigration. How can we deny that letting illegal immigrants into this country doesn't put pressure on every surface?
Thank you. Thank you. Lorna, please continue.
Yes, because it was actually David Cameron who said if it was won by 1 vote, it would stand. And there've been people undermining every attempt to undermine the Brexit vote, which was the majority by a large. But so this, let me speak, because I'm sat here listening. Money, money, money. Throw money at something, that'll solve it. But actually, it's because we can't control our borders and we're getting overwhelmed.
Thank you.
We
Thank
have
you.
always
Thank you.
always taken in refugees, and it has blessed our country. But at the moment, we can't do that.
Laura, would you like to continue?
So childcare, I've already said, is vital, that children get off to a good start. And we have problems with young people later on who are bored. They wonder why they're here, what their purpose in life is. And I think actually we do need to take serious childcare for the early years without a shadow of doubt. And I have to question really the maneuver to push mothers after sort of just a few months, pushing them back into the workplace because of necessity of finance. I think the whole system has been rigged against mothers. Thank you.
Thank you. Neil, please.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I was going to say something else, but I really have to take issue with what the previous speaker tried to lever some sort of statement about immigration into a discussion about childcare. I think it's completely inappropriate, and they should consider what they're saying. I mean, what I was going to say is, I mean, I've got a relatively young family, but no, they're 13 and 15 now. So I do remember what it was like when they were younger. And the pressure that my wife and I were under around trying to get good quality childcare, but also trying to work, continue our careers, it's really, really hard. And that was over 10 years ago now, and it's become a lot harder. My brother he's got a young family, and it's waiting for that relief when they actually enter full-time education, and suddenly you can kind of breathe again. And I think we absolutely recognise that around the provision of childcare across the country. What I am going to say, though, is a slightly counterpoint, is that the role of an MP is not necessarily to sort out that kind of local provision. It is about trying to set that national scene, making sure that the provision is done nationally to make sure that you can go from the national to the local. So what we would be doing if Labour was in power was trying to empower local communities to make sure that, say, Frome Council could try to set up its own local childcare provision to make sure you do have the providers within your community. We also want to make sure we increase wraparound childcare for all families and parents, making it easier for parents to access high quality childcare. So, but what we absolutely want to do is make sure families do have that provision. It's not about throwing, I kind of agree to say, I'm quite annoyed about what I've just heard, really, in trying to be throwing money at the problem. It's not throwing money at the problem. It's making the right investment in people's lives at the outset to make sure you have the right outcomes across their lives, because we have too many young people who are being let down, to be honest, over the last 10 years, and will have their entire lives now blighted because of decisions being made that they had no part in, and make decisions, for instance, about leaving the European Union. I'm not going to get too much into that, but that will cost them across their entire lives.
Thank you, Neil. Rosie, please.
Thank you. Yeah, can I just echo what Neil just said about somebody just trying to shoehorn in some xenophobia there in a question about childcare. There's actually no such thing as an illegal immigrant, and I don't know why someone that seems to care a lot about children and families would care less about a child that came from somewhere else. We're all people. We need to stop this language of othering. Of course, that's mainly a problem with our media and not our government, but hey. Not only do we need to fund proper childcare, it needs to be subsidised, it needs to be affordable for people. Another element of that is wage stagnation. If we were paying people better, they would better be able to afford these services as well. There's something to be said for the fact that it's no longer possible really for most people to be able to afford to live as a household on one income. And why is that? If people want to care for their children themselves, they should be able to. But equally, we need that good childcare provision at an affordable rate that There are places, friends of mine have really struggled to get places for their children so they can go back to work because they want to. That needs to be available and that needs to be funded. Thank you.
Thank you. Martin.
Yeah, I think I'd like to say that perhaps if we rejoin the customs union and the single market, we might have a bit more money in the coffers. To support our public services. Well, forgive me, I've got a sore throat, which I'm sure the other candidates are grateful for. But it occurred to me that actually, having watched Sure Start centres close and having fought very hard to retain some provision in this town as a county councillor, that we've suddenly started talking about childcare. The Conservatives have started putting some money into it, largely because they've realised there's a great economic hole there. And actually, people aren't going back to work, and people can't afford to afford to have their children in childcare. And we've actually got a shortage of labour in this country. So it's about investment. It's not about subsidy. It's about making us able to work and support society. And I also think sometimes the fees at nurseries are so high, it's so difficult for the poorer families to access them.
Thank you. Okay, the next question is a combination of a lot of questions that came into the council, and it's about housing and development. A lot of people in Frome are concerned about the lack of adequate and affordable housing for Frome residents. How do you intend to address this issue? Okay, and we will start with Neil, please.
Okay, at the outset of we were asked a question about our three priorities, and I did highlight housing as one of my key priorities. When I've been knocking on doors in the constituency, across, not just in Frome, but across in Somerton, Bruton, Castle Carey, what has come back to me is this crisis in housing we've actually got in the constituency, that too many people are stuck in the private rental market and can't really afford under at risk of being removed due to their lease being ended. But other people are struggling with their mortgages at the moment. I mean, I know that's a massive pressure on households as well. I think in Frome, I'm quite interested in the feedback from people here actually around the choices that you want to make within constituency. There are currently two competing proposals, I gather, around the Saxon Vale site, and that is the sort of thing that Labour is absolutely looking at when it is in government. It wants to make sure that we have sustainable housing. We want to make sure we have affordable housing for people. We want to make sure there are more council houses built for the public. We are committed to also increasing the number of house building in the county. We want to make sure, in the country, we want to make sure there's 1.5 million new house owners in our term of office. But we are absolutely committed to empowering local communities to make your decisions about your priorities for housing, reforming the planning policy framework to make sure that you can make decisions in your communities to make sure that the right provision is there. We also want to make sure that developers uphold their side of the bargain and actually comply and provide the facilities that are required to deliver those new developments. So Labour does want new housing because we believe that everybody's entitled to a safe, secure home above them. But we also recognise that there are local tensions that local communities need to make a decision about.
Thank you. Rosie, please.
Thank you. So I also spoke initially that housing is a big priority for me and mentioned that currently the huge profits made from social housing aren't reinvested in our housing stock, which is the first step to building lots more homes that people desperately need. But it's also important to note that the going price in Frome to rent a 3-bedroom house is between £1,200 and £1,500. That is 3/4 of the average income for the county. How is anybody supposed to live and work and afford to even just have a roof over their head, not to mention the skyrocketing energy bills and everything else that you need to pay for to live? It's impossible. Our current government are far too busy propping up greedy landlords to care about housing the people here, and that is a huge issue. If we brought in a system of rent control on private lets, we could immediately put a stop to that. And not only that, is it would bring down the government's payments that they have to pay out in housing benefit for people that currently can't afford to pay their own rent. Because if the private rents were lower, they'd be paying less. Thank you.
Thank you. Martin, please.
Yeah, and one of the issues that we have in Somerset is the pollution levels on the Somerset levels, the amount of phosphates that are going into our rivers, into our waterways. And that means it's not possible to actually build houses on those areas at the moment because they're not being cleaned up by Wessex Water or anybody. And so therefore we are finding ourselves in Frome where we don't have the same sort of problem, although there is river pollution, believe me. But we are also ripe now for building. And that's why the developers are wanting to move in. And that's why we have the prospect of Selwood Garden Community, 1,700 houses to the south of Frome, not in Frome, in the Selwood parish, and all the way down to the bypass, possibly even beyond. It's a huge consideration. And if there's going to be building there, it has to be done properly. We have to have facilities, we have to have surgeries, we need shops, we need a school. We cannot just let developers to pick off bits of land and decide they're going to build where they like and what kind of housing they like. We have to determine that those houses are ecologically sound. The housing stock allows for plenty of houses that are rental. The rental market is depleted enormously. And of course, low cost housing. We've seen far too many young people growing up in Frome who end up moving away, perhaps to Westbury, to Warminster, but not staying in their own town because there's a lack of housing. And I don't think I've got time to even talk about Saxon Vale, but really we do need that to be done properly.
Thank you. Sarah, please.
Thank you. Empowering local authorities to build homes is absolutely crucial. And this government has continually failed to build enough homes, making it difficult for our local authorities when it should be them that's leading on house building. So housing growth has been reduced considerably in Somerset, as Martin has said, regarding the phosphate issue that we've got on the SSI site down on the levels of moors. And that's because the government are simply not pushing water companies and stakeholders to find the right type of mitigation to reduce that phosphate pollution in our rivers and enable house building. And in the meantime, places like Frome and Bruton and Wincanton, who sit outside that catchment area, are being trumped every single time with speculative applications over and over again. So what we need the government to do is to look at reforming the 1961 Land Compensation Act, which will give local authorities the power to acquire the land bank land from housing developers at its current use value in order for that to meet the community's need for housing. But you know what? The most important thing that we've got to do is to build the right types of homes in the right places and make sure they're future-proof to the best eco standards, to passive house standards, so that people will be able to live in them for the future. And over that, we need to make sure that we consult with the community, because the community know where they want houses to be built. And over that as well, I want to just emphasize the importance of making sure that we're providing the right type of social housing. You know, I had a family after the floods in May they were flooded out of their homes, completely devastated. They're still living in a motel. There's a family of 6 who are still making sandwiches on a bed in a hotel. We need more social housing.
Thank you. Lorna, please.
Yes, this sounds so familiar to me about the problem with housing, that builders would prefer to build 4-bedroom houses rather than social affordable housing. And they say they will when they start the planning process, and then somehow it just gets, oh, we can't quite manage affordable housing, and it doesn't happen. And also, I believe builders, developers hang on to what would be described as land banks for when they can get a good price for it. So the land has been agreed, but it's not been released. So I think that is an issue to be addressed. And yes, and the backup facilities of doctors and schools. The focus seems to me to be on build houses, but you need the backup facilities to go along with it, which is part of the problem of doctor surgeries and schools, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's go to Peter, please.
As someone that's sat as a town councillor and parish councillor on planning issues, time after time after time, we make recommendations, they go up and they get ignored. And the builders just build what they want. I'm all for building on brownfield sites in the first instance. Only then, when there is no other option, that we should be looking at greenfield sites. There needs to be a mandated number, a percentage of any development that is given over to affordable housing and social housing. And those houses should have solar panels. They should have the best insulation, because the people living in there can't really afford, they're struggling to afford those rents or those mortgages and pay for their heating bills and for their food. But more importantly, why isn't our local county council, Somerset Council, putting in their own buildings and renting them out and making revenue out of that can be then reinvested into the county? For young buyers, we would ensure that there is no stamp duty on their first property. We would help them get on the ladder, but until we get the stock, we need the houses first before we can give them a leg up to get onto that housing ladder. But it's imperative that we do. We need to build on brownfield sites. There needs to be cheap, affordable housing, and there needs to be a set percentage that the developer cannot change. Thank you.
Thank you. Lastly, Faye, please.
Thank you. I think there's a few things to unpack here. One is about our rental market, and I'm really pleased to see the renters bill coming through, which will stop no-fault evictions, will make sure that people can have longer tenancies and feel safer in their privately rented accommodation. We do need to work also on making sure that new homes have the right amount of social housing. And it's really key, I think, that we use the word homes, because houses are not the be-all and end-all of where people live. And we need to make sure that we're looking at building the right kind of communities, working with communities to give the kind of accommodation that is needed. Now, it might be that that's key worker accommodation. And one of the things that I'd like to talk more about is the potential of, you have halls of residence for university students, then suddenly you're a graduate and you're either in a shared house or you're trying to, move back in with your parents. Could we have professional halls of residence where people can go as a first step? What other ways can we be more creative? And how can we work with communities to figure out what you need for the people who live in your community, the people you want to live in your community, and the skills that you need to make your community thrive? Going back to the renters bill, it also protects those landlords so that they know that they can continue to offer the service of private rental without the risk of people who are doing things that are extremely wrong, not being able to leave, but absolutely protecting those who need it. So we can create an economy in the private sector that works for everybody. But we do need to be building more homes, and I'd like to see us using better technology. We've got modern methods of construction where you can build off-site at a lower cost, create much more environmentally friendly homes, get them out quickly. And I'd like to work with local authorities and the planning minister to make sure that we're offering incentives to look at that route, and absolutely making sure we've got solar panels, insulation, all those other things. But the key thing is the community. You know what you need, and government is absolutely looking to listen to that in the new planning legislation.
Thank you. That ends the set questions. We do have time for one more question. I'm just going to review the topics that we've already looked at. The candidates agenda, local agenda, climate, local engagement, healthcare, youth mental health, families, and housing. So preferably a question that isn't one of those. And then I'd like to, if we have time, give the candidates 30 seconds or so at the very end just for their closing statements. Oh, so difficult. Just here, this gentleman here. Yes, please.
7 of you could be in opposite. Oh, thank you.
I'm just going to remind anybody asking questions to keep it apolitical for the,
Okay,
for the sake
understood.
of
That's fine.
the Frome residents.
Ensuring you are working for the residents of Somerton and Frome for the next 18 months is absolutely key. Therefore, putting your essentials, your credentials to one side, what have each of you done over the last 4 weeks to ensure you can hit the ground running?
Thank you. Okay, we'll start with Peter. Can we have a minute on this, please? Okay. Can we start with Martin, please?
Okay, I've continued to work in the last 4 weeks as a councillor. Haven't switched off, haven't changed. It's been very, very difficult. We're fighting what is an incredibly, we're under incredible scrutiny here. This is one of 3 by-elections in the country. And we've been looked at, I can't tell you how many times the press and the TV people have been in touch with all of us. It's been very difficult, but I've tried to carry on with that. And that's a good grounding for government, I think, because I'm dealing on a daily basis with housing issues, with the issues of roads, with schools, and other issues pertaining to climate, which I haven't even mentioned, things like bringing in EV cars and charging points and so on. So I think that's what one can do to prepare, is to actually step up from local government into national government. There are no qualifications for being an MP. Perhaps being in local government should be one of them.
Thank you, Martin. Peter, please.
As I mentioned, I'm a town councillor in Somerton. And over the last week, I've been working pretty hard, trying to save our library because funding is not being increased. So we're looking at means and ways of funding our local library, but it's not just a local library. It's a hub for old people. It's a place where people can go and use computers that don't have their own. It also houses the Citizens Advice Bureau. So I've been working on that, but I've also had other issues on my mind. We have a crossing in Somerton, you may or may not know, but it's been on and off for the last year. I came up with a tax-free solution to everybody to resolve that. It was turned down, but I'm still pushing. So what I'm saying is I'm working at the local level, listening to people, trying to get what affects them. And I would do the same, but on a higher level, should I be voted in on the 20th of July. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Neil, please.
Yeah, I don't actually think there is any real preparation for the role of actually being an MP. I've got quite a lot of Labour Party friends who are MPs in House of Commons at the moment, and that's one of the things they do tell me. You can prepare for it through campaigns like this and the scrutiny that Martin has referenced. Can you hold up under that pressure? Can you articulate a point? Can you understand a constituency and represent them in the House of Commons, your interests in there? I believe I can on all of those, but until you're in the actual House of Commons, until you take up residence there, until you are in the chamber making that representation on behalf of your constituents, then no, you haven't. I think I do have the right skills, capability and ability to make those points in the chamber, but I also have ability to listen. I spent about the best part of a decade representing members in my union, representing their interests, fighting on their behalf. I've stood outside County Hall with placards, but actually what I actually want to do is be inside the hall, making that case on behalf of people in this constituency.
Thank you very much, Neil. Lorna, please.
Yes, thank you. Yes, I think it is good to have been on a council and I learnt a lot, but I feel that actually the real decisions happen in Parliament, which is why I'm standing here And I've stood in the Wells constituency as well for an election, general election. Yes, because I feel that having been a wife and a mother for very many years and seen what's happened to our nation, that actually I'm not saying I could do better, but I know what's right and what is wrong. And I think there've been too many short-term decisions, putting sticky plasters on things and not really getting down to what is the issue, what's going on. And so that's why I have put myself forward and would take very seriously what the issues are in the Frome and Somerton
Thank you.
constituency.
Faye, please.
Thanks. So there are three things really that I've been doing over the last 4 weeks. One is listening to as many residents as possible about the things that they're telling me that they need, and also picking up some casework while on the doors, starting to refer things through to places where people can find help, like the Police and Crime Commissioner, a number of things that he's picked up for me over the last couple of weeks, and building those relationships that I already have with colleagues, both in local government, but also at the national level. When it comes to the concerns that people have had around flooding issues, I've been able to bring ministers around to talk about the different relief they can get. I've been talking to secretaries of state about how we can get better energy security, what we can do for our farmers, but also speaking to my colleagues who are MPs in the surrounding areas, making sure that if I'm elected on Thursday, they'll be there helping me up and running from day one to make sure that any constituent who gets in touch will get a response, will get me working for them in Westminster and making sure I can be a strong voice. So I'm prepared to hit the ground running and support this area.
Thank you. Sarah, please.
Thank you. I was first elected onto the district council in 2015, re-elected in 2019, and then elected onto the unitary council in 2022. So I know how to navigate through local government, and I know most of all how to represent people. But you know, this is serious. This country is looking to this constituency to send a clear message to the Conservative government. You know, my greatest fear that is on Friday, Rishi Sunak is going to appear gloating in Frome to celebrate a Conservative win and declare the Conservatives on course for another general election win. So I have been out knocking on doors day in, day out, listening to the constituents in this part of the world. And I can tell you what, people want change. And they're telling me that they want me to be this change. So let's do it. Let's get a better future for Somerton and Frome and get an MP that cares.
Thank you very much. Okay, we do have a very short bit of time for candidates to give a very, very brief closing statement. Okay, we're going to leave it at 20 seconds. And I know that that's an ask. So Peter, are you ready? Oh, goodness me. I'm so sorry, Peter.
Oh, what?
Did I Rosie, I'm so sorry. I apologize. Rosie, apologies to you.
Thank you. I feel I'm at a slight disadvantage here. I've been working full time alongside this campaign, and we didn't have the backing of the party or anything ready to go. Just the sheer will and determination that we want to do things differently, that I'm just an ordinary working local person like any of you. And so I'm just asking you to put your trust in me that I can represent you in a way that clearly has never been done before. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. 20 seconds, starting with Lorna, please.
Sorry, your question is?
Just your closing statement.
Oh, right. Okay. Yes. Well, I said right at the beginning when the BBC came round to my home to interview me, I don't regard this anything special about me, but I can see that this, when our young people lose hope, we have to take notice.
Thank you. Martin.
Well, first and foremost, I think we're voting for an MP you think will be best suited to representing the interests and the support of the local interests of Somerton and Frome, and to back up the authorities and bring proper funding and recognition into this constituency. We have a lot of independents in Frome and we also have a lot of Green councillors. We are building for the future. And
Thank you.
it's now is the time to vote Green
Thank
in the
you.
next election.
Faye,
Got me.
Faye.
So if you want somebody who's going to hit the ground running, who's listening to you and wants to continue listening to you from Friday and every day afterwards to make sure we've got what we need in this constituency, then vote for me. I'll be a strong voice and I will make a difference to Somerton and Frome.
Thank you. Rosie.
Thank you. So I've never done anything like this before. I hope I've encouraged other people to maybe step out and also do the same. I've never been a councillor before, but nobody's too small to make a difference.
Thank you. Sarah.
You know, I know many Green and Labour voters in this room will be thinking how best to use their vote. So tonight I have a clear message. If you are fed up with this mess of a Conservative government, vote for the Liberal Democrats and make sure your votes vote for change and say enough is enough. Let's get a better MP, somebody who cares and will deliver.
Thank you. Peter. Thank you.
I want to see a change for the people of Somerton and Frome. I want to stand for you. I want to hear your concerns. I want to take all of those concerns to Westminster, and I will fight for you tooth and nail to get what you, the people of Somerton and Frome, want. Thank you.
Thank you. Neil.
Thank you. You've heard a lot from some of the other parties on the stage about what they're going to do when they're in Parliament. They're not going to do any of them. The only party that can actually do that is the Labour Party. And it's the only party that can mount the challenge in the House of Commons to tell Rishi Sunak his time is up. We need a general election now and a new government that's going to sort out the problems that this country faces. And I'm the only person who can do that on behalf of this constituency.
Thank you. I would like to take the opportunity to thank all the candidates on stage, particularly for keeping quite tightly to your time limits. Thank you very much, and thank you for being with us today. I'd also like to thank the audience for being an outstanding audience and being very respectful to the candidates on stage, and for your patience, and apologies to those people that I missed out. It's 2 hours of bright lights. I'm going to invite the candidates to join their party at their tables for further communications. And I'd also like to thank Laura. I'd like to thank Paul, Peter, Rachel, and the rest of Frome Town Council for putting on the event, as well as the Cheese and Grain. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Thank you very much.